Imagine a metropolis where 1 million hungry people wake up every morning. Today, supplying such a city requires thousands of trucks, trains, and massive distribution centers. But 2,000 years ago, humanity had neither engines nor computer systems. Sounds crazy, right? Despite this, ancient Rome successfully solved a logistical problem that would make modern corporate managers weep today. Now let's look at this problem through the lens of simple numbers. The city required about 400,000 tons of grain every single year. This is not a typo, but the harsh mathematical reality of the ancient world. If the Romans had decided to transport this volume by cart, the traffic jam would have stretched for hundreds of kilometers. Fortunately for Rome, its engineers and rulers thought on a completely different scale. They built a supply system that ran with the precision of a Swiss watch. Most empires of that time collapsed under far smaller problems. But Rome understood one brilliant thing: whoever controls food controls the world. Grain became the main fuel for this massive state machine. Without it, there would have been no legions, no gladiatorial fights, and no emperors themselves. It was a struggle for survival that evolved into the highest art of logistics. Modern scholars are still amazed by the complexity of these ancient routes. This isn't just a story about little ships sailing the seas with sacks of flour. We're talking about an incredibly complex network of contracts, warehouses, insurance payments, and port infrastructure. Your office job requires a degree, but ancient planners did far more complex things without any Excel. And this is where the most interesting part begins for any inquisitive mind. Let's break this system down into its components and see how it actually worked. Most ancient cities were built where the land could feed them, but Rome quickly outgrew the modest capabilities of Italian geography. The fields around the capital produced excellent grapes and olives, but were completely unsuitable for large-scale wheat cultivation. And here lies the main mystery of the ancient economy. How do you provide a metropolis with basic calories when the nearest reliable breadbasket is thousands of kilometers away? Winning endless wars is one thing, but feeding 1 million citizens every day is quite another. The Roman population required colossal amounts of carbohydrates to survive. Modern logisticians look at these calculations and simply swallow hard. Transporting such a volume by land would have required endless caravans of mules and oxen. But the draft animals would have eaten more grain along the way than they could have carried. Therefore, long-distance land transport was immediately ruled out due to its absolute economic absurdity. The empire realized an obvious truth: using water was far more profitable than using roads. A single medium-sized merchant ship could carry as much cargo as hundreds of carts. Moreover, a favorable wind, unlike oxen, did not require daily feeding. This was the first logical step toward creating a large-scale maritime supply chain. The Romans realized that their future depended directly on complete control over the Mediterranean Sea. The capital needed more than just food. It required uninterrupted supplies on a massive scale. Any delay meant empty markets, and empty markets led to immediate riots. A hungry mob of Roman citizens was the most terrifying, destructive force of antiquity. No legions or city guard could have stopped this frenzied tide. The rulers clearly understood that their power literally sailed on merchant ships. And if those ships were late, the emperor's throne would quickly turn into a scaffold. Initially, Rome tried to rely on harvests from nearby Sicily. The island did indeed yield plenty of grain, but its supply soon proved insufficient for the growing behemoth. Moreover, Sicilian harvests were heavily dependent on the whims of the weather. A single dry year could bring the entire empire to the brink of a catastrophic disaster. Rome needed a source that would run like clockwork, regardless of the rain. That is precisely why the emperors turned their attention to the other side of the Mediterranean Sea. North Africa became the first major addition to the food security system. The local lands were incredibly fertile, and the shipping route across the sea remained relatively short. For centuries, the African provinces fed nearly half the capital. But even this resource eventually proved insufficient for the insatiable city. A real jackpot was needed, a guarantee that grain would always be available. And such a jackpot was found after the final fall of the Ptolemaic dynasty. The conquest of Egypt solved Rome's food problem for several centuries to come. This land possessed a unique natural mechanism that made agriculture incredibly stable. When Octavian Augustus annexed this territory, he effectively saved Rome from certain starvation. Egypt became the emperor's personal property, a source of carbohydrates for the entire empire. Now, Rome had two of the most powerful agricultural engines at its disposal. North Africa and Egypt worked in tandem so that 1 million people could sleep soundly at night. This logistical axis became the foundation upon which the entire ancient civilization rested. Modern economists would call this brilliant risk diversification. The Romans, however, simply wanted to be sure they would have something to eat tomorrow. And for the sake of that certainty, they built fleets the likes of which the world had never seen. Egypt was not just a province, it was a true agricultural marvel. The secret of its incredible productivity lay in the annual floods of the Great Nile River. Every summer, the river overflowed its banks, bringing mineral-rich silk to the fields. This functioned as a perfect natural fertilization system, requiring no human intervention. Local farmers had only to sow their seeds in the moist soil and wait for them to sprout. Compared to the back-breaking labor in the Italian foothills, this seemed like a true gift from the gods. Roman engineers looked at this system and decided to make the most of it. They did not change centuries-old Egyptian customs, but simply improved the local infrastructure. Old canals were cleared and new irrigation systems were built. Crop yields in the region soared to heights unseen in the ancient world. The land along the Nile turned into a giant grain-producing factory. Control over this territory was so crucial that the emperors imposed strict rules. Senators were forbidden from even visiting Egypt without the ruler's personal permission. Sounds like paranoia, doesn't it? But the logic here was absolutely ironclad and justified. Whoever controlled the granaries of Alexandria effectively had Rome by the throat. No emperor wanted to give his political rivals such a powerful weapon. Local farmers paid their taxes not in gold or silver, but in pure grain. The harvested wheat was transported to massive state granaries throughout the river valley. From there, river barges slowly carried this priceless cargo down to the port of Alexandria. This inland river logistics system operated with frightening efficiency. Modern supply chains pride themselves on their optimization, but the Romans did the same thing using muscle power. But harvesting the crop and delivering it to the port was only half the battle. The real problems began when the cargo set out into the open sea. Ahead lay thousands of kilometers of unpredictable saltwater. There were no Coast Guard, no weather radars, and no rescue helicopters. Crews had to rely solely on the strength of the hull and the mercy of the sea gods. And this is where the Romans' most ambitious creation comes into play. To transport mountains of grain, it was necessary to create an entirely new type of vessel. Ordinary merchant ships could not handle such massive volumes. The state needed true floating fortresses, capable of carrying hundreds of tons of cargo. The shipbuilders of Alexandria began constructing vessels that were several times larger than the usual size. This was a true breakthrough in ancient shipbuilding, driven by dire necessity. The construction techniques for these giants were kept strictly secret. They used complex systems for fastening the wood, which made the hull surprisingly sturdy. Thick planks were fastened with copper nails to prevent rapid rusting in salt water. It sounds like a simple detail, but it was precisely this that saved thousands of lives. Through trial and error, Roman engineers discovered the perfect formula for shipbuilding glue and resin. These giant barges became the pride of the empire and the foundation of its prosperity. As the fleet grew, Rome began to feel like the true master of the seas. The state apparatus established a rhythm in which Alexandria pulsed like a giant heart. Every ship sent out was a breath of fresh air for the metropolis, which was suffocating from hunger. But to manage this flow, a special organization was needed, and the Romans created an institution that would forever go down in the history of logistics. It was called the Anona, and its power surpassed that of many modern monopolies. Rome's supply system could not rely on the chaotic actions of private merchants. Strict coordination was needed, and to that end, the emperors established the Anona. This organization was responsible for planning, purchasing, and transporting every handful of grain. The department was headed by a prefect, whose authority was second only to that of the emperor himself. If he failed in his task, he faced not dismissal, but rather public execution. Roman officials were highly motivated to do their jobs well. The Anona's main tool was its famous grain fleets. The most famous of these was the Alexandrian fleet, consisting of enormous cargo ships. These ships were called corbites, and they were the true leviathans of antiquity. An average grain ship could carry between 300 and 400 tons of net cargo. Some flagship vessels, such as the famous Isis, carried over 1,000 tons. Imagine a wooden ship the size of a modern high-rise building. My hands start to ache just thinking about how many trees had to be cut down for a single giant like that. They were incredibly difficult to maneuver due to their enormous mass and sluggishness. They had no modern rudders, only two enormous steering oars at the stern. It took tremendous physical strength and skill just to keep the ship on course. The crews of these ships were considered the elite of the ancient merchant fleet. The fleet operated on a strict schedule dictated by nature itself. Navigation in the Mediterranean was safe only from late spring to early fall. This period was called the open sea, and it was during this time that all major voyages took place. In winter, violent storms began, and shipping came to a complete halt for several months. This created a huge problem for planning the city's food supplies. To speed up the process, the Romans used a clever system of sails. In addition to a huge square sail, they set a small foresail called an artemon. This innovation allowed them to catch the crosswind better and maneuver in narrow passages. Modern sailors use similar principles, but they have carbon fiber winches. Ancient sailors, however, pulled ropes as thick as a man's arm with their bare hands. These men were true athletes, even though no one signed them up for gym memberships. When Anona's fleet approached the Italian coast, it was a true celebration. Crowds gathered in the ports, awaiting the arrival of the life-saving grain. Imperial messengers raced to Rome to be the first to report the good news. On the ancient stock markets, prices for speculative grain immediately plummeted. This information system worked faster than the modern postal service in many countries. However, arrival at the port did not mean the end of all logistical problems. On the contrary, it was only the beginning of the next, most difficult stage. The giant Alexandrian ships sat too deep in the water. They were physically unable to enter the shallow mouths of Roman rivers or old ports. They had to drop anchor in the roadstead and wait for the arrival of special unloading crews. And here, Rome's logistical machine faced its main bottleneck. Transshipping goods in open water always carries enormous risks. A sudden squall could smash the ships into one another in a matter of minutes. But Anona's officials simply had no other way out of the situation. They hired thousands of local boatmen for this dangerous and arduous work. All this commotion on the water resembled a disturbed anthill, where everyone knew their task. The sea route had always been a game of Russian roulette for ancient sailors. The Romans built magnificent ships, but they could not control the weather. Sudden storms regularly took a bloody toll on the imperial convoys. The loss of even a single large vessel meant that thousands of people in Rome would go without dinner. Therefore, planners factored a certain percentage of losses into their annual calculations in advance. Modern logisticians call this shrinkage costs, but the Romans simply offered sacrifices to the gods. Navigation without a compass or GPS required intuition and immense experience. Captains navigated by the stars, the sun, and the color of the sea. They knew every current and every shoal along the route from Africa to Italy. But even the best captain was powerless when the sky was covered with black clouds for days on end. Ships would lose their course and crash against the sharp rocks of unknown islands. To encourage captains to risk their lives, the state offered them a deal. It was one of the first large-scale state insurance systems in history. If a ship sank due to a storm, the emperor would compensate the owner for the cost of the lost vessel. Sounds like a modern insurance policy from a major bank, doesn't it? But it worked flawlessly and attracted many enterprising people to the business. The risk of ruin vanished, giving way to a pure thirst for profit. However, insurance did not save the sailors themselves from drowning in the cold water. During heavy pitching, the grain in the holds could shift to one side. This instantly capsized the heavy ship, leaving the crew no chance of survival. To avoid this, the grain was packed into sturdy sacks, or special wooden bulkheads were constructed. In essence, ancient cargo handlers invented a cargo balancing system long before the advent of container ships. Another hidden threat along the route was shipworms and rot. Wood exposed to seawater quickly deteriorated. Ships had to be regularly hauled ashore for drying and repairs. The hulls were covered with lead sheets to protect them from voracious parasites. This cost a fortune, but it extended the ship's life by several precious years. Repair docks operated non-stop, just like modern auto repair shops. There were even times when captains had to deliberately throw cargo overboard. During a storm, this was the only way to lighten the ship and save the crew. Imagine the faces of the officials when the captain returned to port with empty holds. The law clearly regulated such situations, exempting the crew from criminal liability. The lives of experienced sailors were valued more highly than a couple hundred tons of sunken wheat. That said, sometimes they brought back Italian wine, olive oil, and handicrafts. But the volume of these exports seemed simply laughable compared to the grain imports. Rome was a consumer city, a black hole that sucked in resources from across the entire known world. The entire Mediterranean economy was artificially built around the needs of a single capital. And this imbalance constantly demanded strict administrative control from above. As soon as control weakened, the intricate system began to fall apart at the seams. Despite all the hardships of storms and laws, ships continued to sail stubbornly forward. Their captains became heroes of their time, risking everything for gold and glory. The sea route was the nerve center of the empire, through which its life pulsed. The final destination of this complex journey was always the coast of Italy. There lay the site of the most ambitious infrastructure project of antiquity. Centuries ago, the Tiber River was the main transport artery leading to Rome. But for the giant grain ships of Alexandria, this river proved completely useless. Its mouth was too shallow, and the sandbars constantly shifted position. The giant ships were forced to anchor in the open roadstead, exposing themselves to the risk of sudden storms. An urgent and radical engineering solution was needed, one worthy of a great empire. And emperors Claudius and Trajan decided to reshape nature itself for the sake of logistical convenience. They began a massive construction project to build an artificial port in the city of Ostia. It was a project comparable in scale to the construction of the Panama Canal. Engineers dug a gigantic artificial harbor capable of sheltering hundreds of enormous ships. To protect the port from waves, colossal concrete breakwaters were erected, extending far out into the sea. A ship that had previously transported an Egyptian obelisk was sunk to serve as the foundation for one of the breakwaters. Later, Emperor Trajan added a hexagonal-shaped inner harbor to this complex. This shape was chosen not out of a love for geometry, but to maximize the length of the berthing line. The inner basin was completely sheltered from the vagaries of the Mediterranean weather. Ships would enter, moor, and begin unloading in complete calm. Modern satellite images still clearly show the contours of this engineering marvel. For its time, it was a truly high-tech transportation hub. Thousands of porters, known as Sakaria, worked in the port around the clock. They carried sacks of grain on their backs, climbing up and down narrow wooden gangways. This work was so exhausting that the average life expectancy of a porter was alarmingly low. In modern ports, this work is done by robotic cranes and conveyor belts. The Romans, however, relied on an endless supply of cheap human labor. My shoulders start to ache just thinking about such a grueling shift. The barges were pulled upriver using ropes running along the bank. Oxen, or teams of specially trained slaves, were used as the pulling force. The Tiber's current was quite fast, so the ascent took 3 grueling days. On the return trip, the empty barges floated downstream in just a few hours. This constant movement on the river resembled heavy traffic on a modern, congested highway. The port administration kept meticulous records of every sack that arrived and departed. Clay tablets and papyri with detailed accounting records from that time have survived. Roman inspectors personally checked the quality of the grain, ensuring that it had not spoiled en route. Any attempt to mix sand or stones into the sacks was met with severe physical punishment. The quality of the grain for the citizens had to remain impeccable at any cost. No one wanted to mess with food intended for the volatile Roman crowd. When the barges finally reached Rome's city docks, the baton was passed on. At the foot of the Aventine Hill lay a district entirely dedicated to port logistics. There were the final stops along the route, massive buildings that concealed the city's inner workings. The river had done its job, and now the cargo had to be transferred to long-term storage. The empire had to protect the harvested grain from moisture, rats, and cunning thieves. The grain brought into the city could not simply be dumped in a pile on the street. Rome needed infrastructure to safely store hundreds of thousands of tons of provisions. The answer to this challenge was the Horia, monumental complexes of ancient warehouses. The most famous of these, the Horium of Galba, covered an area the size of several football fields. These were not just barns, but true engineering masterpieces with climate control. Modern warehouses are built according to the very same basic principles. The main enemy of grain was not a barbarian army, but simple humidity and dangerous mold. To protect their supplies, the Romans built structures with a complex system of raised floors. The floors were elevated above the ground on small brick columns, creating an air cushion. Air constantly circulated beneath the floor, preventing dampness from penetrating the interior. The walls also had special ventilation openings positioned at a specific angle to the sun. The second dangerous enemy was the hordes of hungry and ubiquitous rodents. Rats could destroy an entire empire's strategic reserves in a matter of months. Roman architects covered the floors and the lower parts of the walls with a thick layer of special cement. Broken glass and sharp ceramics were added to this cement so that rats would break their teeth on it. Ingenious and simple, without any complex, high-tech chemical poisons. Such solutions demonstrate the incredible practicality of the ancient engineering mind. The security of the warehouses was comparable to that of modern bank vaults. The complexes were surrounded by high, solid walls with no windows on the ground floors. Heavy iron gates with complex mechanical locks, which could not be quickly picked, led inside. The area was patrolled around the clock by armed guards from the city's military cohorts. The theft of imperial grain was considered a state crime of the highest severity. The logistics inside the warehouse itself were also thought out down to the smallest detail. Ramps were used instead of stairs to lift heavy sacks to the second and third floors. Along these gentle slopes, draft animals or slaves could easily haul carts loaded with grain. The accounting system was so strict that officials knew the exact number of sacks in each cell. This entire massive database was stored in the scribes' heads and on wax tablets. It was the ancient equivalent of a modern computer program for warehouse inventory management. The state always maintained a safety margin in case of unforeseen global disasters. Under ideal conditions, Rome's granaries stored enough grain to sustain the city for a year of self-sufficiency. This allowed them to mitigate the effects of local crop failures or severe winter storms at sea. If a single fleet was delayed, the city would simply open its reserve granaries. Today, many countries rely on day-to-day imports and do not have such massive reserves. The horea were used not only for grain, but also for storing other strategic goods. Millions of liters of olive oil were stored there in bulbous clay amphorae. Nearby were mountains of salted pork and huge barrels of cheap sour wine. All this wealth was gradually distributed to the countless bakeries and markets of the capital. And it was precisely this distribution process that was the empire's most complex political mechanism. Because distributing food to 1 million people is a more difficult task than bringing it in. The warehouses stood like silent titans, guarding the peace of the vast metropolis. As long as their depths were full, the emperor could sleep soundly in his palace. The crowd in the Colosseum applauded the gladiators only when their stomachs were full. The Horia were the very foundation upon which the majestic edifice of the Roman world rested. And the keys to these buildings were in the hands of the officials who managed the famous state distribution. It wasn't enough to bring grain to Rome. It also had to be distributed properly. And here the empire used a system that still sparks heated debate among economists. The state distributed bread to a vast number of citizens for free or at a reduced price. This process was called frumentation, and it became the foundation of the metropolis's social stability. Hundreds of thousands of men regularly came to claim their lawful portion of free calories. It sounds like a strange utopia, but it was the harsh pragmatism of the rulers. Only full citizens of the Great Rome were entitled to receive a free ration. In the empire's heyday, this privileged list included up to 200,000 people. Each received about 5 modi of grain per month, which amounted to just over 30 kilograms. This amount was enough to feed not only the recipient himself, but also a couple of his family members. The lists were strictly checked, and getting on them was the cherished dream of any poor person. The distribution mechanism was organized with striking and impeccable bureaucratic precision. Citizens received a special wooden or bronze token called a tessera. This tessera was the exact equivalent of a modern social card used to receive benefits. On the appointed day, people would come to a monumental portico where mass distribution took place. Officials checked the lists, collected the tokens, and carefully dispensed a measured amount of wheat. Queues were strictly regulated. No fighting or pushing was ever allowed. Later in the 3rd century, the emperors decided to make life even easier for their citizens. They began distributing pre-baked bread instead of heavy, uncooked grain. The state built giant water mills on the Janiculum Hill for mass grinding. These industrial complexes ground tons of wheat day and night without the slightest sign of fatigue. Rome gradually transformed into a consumer society where even cooking was no longer necessary. Over time, other generous gifts from the ruling emperors were added to the bread. The list of free handouts included high-quality pork, olive oil, and cheap wine. The phrase "bread and circuses" became not just a metaphor, but a real political manifesto. Citizens grew accustomed to having their basic needs fully provided for by the supreme authority. This created a massive dependence of the entire society on a centralized logistical machine. Self-reliance gave way to a comfortable and well-fed submission to a harsh dictatorship. But this system was an enormous financial burden on the imperial treasury. A colossal portion of Rome's entire massive budget went toward maintaining these handouts. Any crisis in the provinces or loss of the fleet immediately hit the capital's wallet. The authorities had to urgently buy grain from private merchants at absolutely extortionate prices. The state found itself held hostage by its own social welfare system. Attempts to abolish the free distributions always ended in massive political disasters. The mob instantly took to the streets, setting fire to luxurious buildings and brutally murdering officials. Emperors became obedient slaves to the well-fed monster they themselves had created. They were forced to smile and continue feeding a city of millions at any conceivable cost. This deal with the devil ensured peace, but slowly drained the resources of the entire empire. The system, created for salvation, began methodically devouring its own creators. This entire gigantic apparatus required masterful management at absolutely every level. And although the Anona was a government agency, it could not function without the help of businessmen. The Roman Empire never attempted to nationalize the entire vast merchant fleet. It harnessed the power and flexibility of private capital to address strategic state objectives. This intertwining of business and government gave rise to incredibly complex schemes of mutually beneficial cooperation. Government officials quickly realized they could not build all the necessary ships. The empire desperately needed the experience, audacity, and vast wealth of private entrepreneurs. Therefore, the Anona began entering into contracts with guilds of independent shipowners, known as Navicularii. These men were the oligarchs of antiquity, controlling entire fleets of merchant cargo ships. They assumed the risk of maritime transport in exchange for enormous guaranteed profits. The state became the largest and most generous customer in the logistics services market of antiquity. To attract businessmen, shrewd emperors introduced completely unprecedented tax breaks. A person who built a ship of a certain capacity for transporting grain received significant privileges. He was exempted from many onerous municipal duties and high property taxes. It sounds like an ideal offshore zone or a modern special economic zone. Businessmen immediately sensed the profit and began actively investing gold in large-scale shipbuilding. Relationships between the Anona and ship owners were always formalized through strict legal contracts. The private contractor was obligated to transport a specific volume of state cargo within strictly defined deadlines. In return, he received a fixed fee and could load the remaining space with his own goods. This mixed system of commercial transport proved incredibly effective and remarkably flexible. If a storm broke out at sea, captains would save the emperor's precious grain first and foremost. After all, the loss of state property could very easily cost one's head. Over time, wealthy grain merchants became a very powerful political force in the Senate. Their immense wealth allowed them to influence the appointment of officials and the passage of new laws. But this influence was always strictly limited by a natural fear of the emperor's wrath. If a merchant crossed the line, his property was confiscated without lengthy legal proceedings. The authorities made it clear that business could make money, but dared not dictate terms. The division of risks between the government and business allowed this complex system to function for centuries. When the economy declined, private merchants went bankrupt, but the state quickly found new, ambitious players. The thirst for immense wealth always successfully overcame the fear of the deep sea and harsh bureaucracy. This strong symbiotic bond made Rome the most powerful trading empire of antiquity. Money kept the wheels of logistics turning, and logistics reliably sustained the life of a vast metropolis. But in this nearly perfect system, the factor of human weakness was always lurking in the background. Local corruption sometimes reached alarming proportions, despite the real threat of the death penalty. Inspectors turned a blind eye to significant shortfalls in exchange for a heavy pouch of silver in the pocket of their cloak. Merchants mixed old, spoiled grain into the new harvest for a quick profit. Emperors had to constantly carry out harsh purges within the bureaucracy to prevent the system from grinding to a complete halt. Managing logistics turned into an endless, grueling battle against ordinary human greed. In the end, the balance between private interests and public duty was maintained only through strict control. As long as the emperors kept a firm grip on the reins, vast fleets sailed the seas without fail. The Romans proved that complex logistics networks could function perfectly well even without digital technology. All that was needed were clear laws, harsh punishments, and very strong financial incentives. But when the system did fail, the consequences were truly apocalyptic for absolutely everyone. Food security was not merely an economic issue, it was a matter of the emperor's survival. Roman history is replete with examples where bread shortages led to bloody palace coups. If ships were delayed by even a couple of weeks, the crowds in the streets would begin to grumble menacingly. No one listened to reasonable excuses about violent storms, pirates, or poor harvests in Egypt. People wanted to eat right now, and their blind rage was always directed at whoever sat on the throne. The Roman throne was the most dangerous job in the entire ancient world. Let's recall the famous story of when an angry, starving crowd pelted Emperor Claudius with stale bread. People simply surrounded his lavish litter in the forum and began viciously hurling crusts at him. It was an incredible and dangerous humiliation for a man who ruled over half of the known civilized world. Claudius miraculously escaped to the palace, and this unpleasant incident forced him to accelerate the construction of the port. Fear of one's own people has always been the best incentive for large-scale infrastructure projects. Political rivals fully understood the critical vulnerability of this food supply artery. During frequent civil wars, the first blow was always struck against the capital's supply lines. Whoever captured North Africa or distant Egypt could easily dictate any terms to Rome. The famous general Vespasian seized power precisely in this way, cutting off supplies of life-saving Egyptian grain. He simply sat in Alexandria and waited for starving Rome to bring him the golden crown on a platter. It was the most effective and remarkably bloodless blockade in the history of wars for the throne. When the empire began to rapidly weaken under the blows of the barbarians, its complex logistics system collapsed first. Pirates once again brazenly raised their heads in the Mediterranean, intercepting defenseless grain convoys with impunity. Savage Vandals seized North Africa, permanently cutting Rome off from its main source of carbohydrates. The capital suddenly realized with horror that it could no longer feed even a tenth of its inhabitants. The city began to rapidly empty, quickly turning into a gigantic and eerie, monumental ghost town. The bustling metropolis of 1 million people shrank to the pitiful size of a modest medieval settlement. This terrible collapse vividly demonstrated just how fragile Rome's artificial food ecosystem had been. A city living exclusively off distant, foreign resources is doomed without flawless logistics. The complex mechanism, painstakingly built over centuries, completely broke down in just a few tragic decades. Huge stone granaries stood empty, luxurious ships rotted in the harbors, and mighty aqueducts ran dry. Nature very quickly reclaimed the very hills that had once been the center of the ancient world. The history of Roman food is a gripping tale of the greatest triumph and the most devastating fall. People learned to successfully conquer distances in stormy seas, but they could not conquer political greed. The system of free handouts, which had saved the city from riots, ultimately completely stripped it of its inner strength. When abundant external supplies ceased, the pampered Romans simply did not know how to feed themselves. They had long forgotten how to properly hold a plow, retaining only the habit of standing in line for bread. This is a very harsh historical lesson for any modern society that is completely dependent on global supplies. And yet, the incredible scale of Roman engineering continues to genuinely amaze us today. They created a unique logistics network, the likes of which the vast world would not see for the next 1,500 years. Only in the distant era of industrialization was a more robust humanity able to replicate such grandiose volumes of transportation. Their vast fleets, reliable ports, and well-thought-out laws became a solid foundation for future generations of seafarers. The Great Rome eventually fell, but its methods of managing space and resources lived on through the centuries. After the fall of Rome, Europe plunged for a long time into a dark age of isolated local economies. People once again began to feed themselves exclusively on what they could grow within sight of their homes. The idea of transporting hundreds of thousands of tons of grain across the stormy sea seemed like magic to medieval peasants. The monumental warehouses of the Great Ostia were barbarically dismantled for their sturdy bricks to build modest churches and fortresses. The secrets of constructing massive and reliable grain ships were lost along with the ambitions of the great emperors. Logistics had regressed a full 1,000 years, giving way to the primitive survival of small, scattered groups. Even the greatest and most powerful kings of the Middle Ages could not feed an army of 100,000 men. Their lavish courts were forced to constantly move from place to place, completely depleting the resources in their path. The Romans would have easily solved this trivial problem by building a couple of granaries and quickly summoning the Navigational. But in the new, harsh world, there was no longer an all-powerful Anona, nor complex freight contracts. That very same massive bureaucratic machine, which turned the absolutely impossible into a tedious daily routine, had vanished without a trace. It is especially important to note that ancient logistics operated perfectly well without any fossil fuels. Their entire, gigantic, unwieldy machine moved solely by human muscle, tailwinds, and water. It was a completely eco-friendly economy if one turns a blind eye to the massive, barbaric deforestation. Today, we thoughtlessly burn millions of barrels of oil to deliver fresh avocados to our cozy supermarkets. The Romans did an excellent job of supplying their metropolis using only the planet's renewable natural resources. Their incredible approach to safe food storage was also ahead of its time by many millennia. The use of natural ventilation in massive granaries allowed grain to be stored for years without any chemical treatment. Ancient architects understood the complex physics of airflow better than many modern licensed builders. Today, we carelessly waste megawatts of electricity on massive industrial air conditioners and dehumidifiers. The Romans, however, simply built proper raised floors and very skillfully positioned small ventilation windows. Sometimes ingenious simplicity and an understanding of the laws of nature work far better than any complex electronic mechanisms. Complex international supply chains require absolute trust among thousands of completely different strangers. Without harsh legions strictly enforcing the laws, Anona's contracts instantly turned into useless scraps of papyrus. Unique knowledge did not vanish overnight. It simply became completely unnecessary to anyone in the New World. Why spend years building a 1,000-ton ship if you only need to transport a sack of turnips? The scale of the technologies employed is always dictated exclusively by the scale of the pressing tasks facing society. Great Rome created for itself the problem of 1,000,000 hungry mouths, and it was Rome itself that devised a brilliant solution for it. When this problem finally dissipated, the brilliant solution faded into history as completely unnecessary. Logistics is always merely an exact mirror image of the ambitions of the historical era in which it exists. Today, modern archaeologists are piecing together the picture of this forgotten ancient wonder of the world, bit by bit. As they meticulously study sunken ships and warehouse ruins, they are genuinely amazed by the audacity of ancient engineers. These amazing discoveries finally shatter the old stereotype about the primitiveness of people from the distant past. We have become too accustomed to thinking that true globalization began only with the advent of high-speed internet and aviation. But the ancient Romans proved that continents can be reliably connected with the help of a favorable wind and wooden planks. The Roman Empire fed a massive city of 1,000,000 people, solving the same problems as the modern world. Only they did so using completely different, incredibly complex, and now long-forgotten methods. Today, the food supply chains of the US or Europe rely entirely on algorithms, diesel fuel, and massive refrigerated trucks. Ancient Rome relied exclusively on the power of Mediterranean winds, ingenious bureaucracy, and boundless human endurance. We take immense pride in one-day delivery, while they took genuine pride in the fact that their city did not die of starvation. The difference in the tools used is enormous, but the very essence of the logistical challenge remains absolutely unchanged. A close study of the Roman Anona forces us to take a completely fresh look at our own logistics. We've grown too quickly accustomed to taking food on supermarket shelves for granted. But behind every cheap package of pasta stands a vast, invisible army of weary drivers, sailors, and warehouse workers. These are the very same ancient naviculari and saccarari, only armed with smartphones and electric forklifts. And just as in ancient Rome, their daily work separates our civilization from utter barbarism. Any modern society is exactly 3 missed meals away from total and bloody social collapse. This mutually beneficial arrangement has worked perfectly for centuries, successfully weathering dozens of terrible wars and changes in ruling dynasties. The true, unbreakable strength of the empire has always lain not in the sharp swords of the legions, but in the taut sails of grain ships. The next time you're stuck in a tedious traffic jam behind a massive logistics truck, just think of Rome. You're looking at a direct, technological descendant of the ancient Alexandrian fleets, bringing life to your city. 2,000 long years have passed, but humanity remains just as obsessed with delivering calories from point A to point B. We've simply swapped canvas sails for powerful engines and wax tablets for digital cloud databases. Logistics rules this world with an iron fist today, just as it did in Caesar's time. And whoever controls the supply routes still holds the keys to the future firmly in their hands.